The summer of 1887 had burned itself into the land, turning every blade of grass brittle, every breath sharp as sand. The wind carried dust like a slow-moving tide, whispering through cracked boards and the bones of cattle long gone. A place called Dry Creek on maps had long since lost its creek, and its name was hardly worth remembering. Toward its heart, where the last well still gave iron-tasting water, a woman walked barefoot through the heat. Her name was Leora Finch, and she hadn't spoken to a soul in 3 days. Her dress was torn past the knees, streaked with dried clay. One shoulder showed through a rip that the sun had kissed too long. Her lips, split and trembling, caught the faint glint of water in the distance. One more mirage, maybe. But she moved anyway. The townsfolk who saw her from behind half-drawn curtains didn't open their doors. A stranger, dirt-streaked, eyes wild, nothing but trouble. The sound of hinges shutting followed her down the crooked road. She reached the well and leaned hard on the rim, her breath a dry rattle. When she pulled up the rope, the bucket clanged against stone, heavy with promise. The first sip burned her throat. The second came slower. The water smelled of rust and old nails, but it was mercy just the same. A bead of it ran down her wrist, tracing the pale scar that lived there like a memory. She flinched. Before she could stop herself, a flash, too quick to belong to now, cut through her mind. A hand gripping her arm, a voice shouting not her name but a number, and the sting of salt when the rope bit into her skin. She blinked hard until the vision faded, leaving only the hush of wind and the sound of the bucket swaying. The square lay empty. Not even the dogs barked. The whole place felt half abandoned, like everyone had left their bodies behind but forgot to tell their shadows. The sign that once read Dry Creek General hung from a single nail, spinning slow in the hot air. Leora pressed a palm against her ribs. Pain bloomed where the bruises still lay hidden under the fabric. "They'll come," she whispered. Her voice cracked like dry bark. "They'll come to find me." Beyond the silence, a faint sound stirred. Boots on gravel. Slow, steady, unhurried. The kind of walk that didn't ask permission. Leora turned, squinting into the sun. The shape was blurred at first, swallowed by the glare. A man, maybe. Broad-shouldered, tall, the brim of his hat cutting the light in two. He carried something that caught the sun. Metal. Or maybe just a glint of water. Her heart skipped once. The instinct to run clawed its way up, but her legs felt hollow. The road behind her shimmered with heat. Nowhere to go but back into the thirst. She stayed still, hand tightening around the rope of the well. The man stopped a few paces away. The air between them held the sound of cicadas, the low groan of wind pushing through fence wire. He didn't speak, didn't leer or smirk the way men sometimes did when they saw a woman broken down and alone. He only stood there, his shadow long and cool across the dirt. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he reached into a worn leather bag and set down a tin cup. Steam rose from it, carrying the scent of broth. And and something kind. Lyora's throat ached at the smell. Her mind whispered trap, but her body said mercy. She stared at the cup, then at him. His face half hidden under the hat's edge, skin darkened by sun and wind, the stillness in him unsettling in its gentleness. "Who are you?" she meant to ask, but the words never made it out. Her voice was gone again, buried under too many nights of fear. He took a single step back, leaving the cup between them. Then he spoke, voice low, quiet as the first drop of rain after drought. "You look like you could use a drink." The bucket behind her swung once, knocking softly against stone. Somewhere far off, thunder muttered. Too faint to be a promise, too close to be ignored. She looked at the cup again, at the warmth rising from it like a breath she hadn't taken in years. And behind her, from the edge of the street, another sound began to rise. The whisper of hooves against dust, faint, but growing. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain that never came. Dust swirled around the man's boots as he knelt to place the cup closer. The steam curled upward, a thin ghost between them. Leora's hands stayed tight around the well's rope. The splinters bit her palm, but it was pain she understood. The stranger didn't rush her. His hat hid most of his face, yet his stillness said more than words. When he finally spoke, his tone was measured, low, like someone careful not to wake a sleeping thing. "You're safe here," he said, "for now." She stared at him, eyes wide and wary. The word safe had long stopped meaning anything. It was a sound people used before they closed the door behind you. He took off his hat then. Sweat darkened the band, and the sun picked out the gray in his short-cropped hair. His skin was the color of river mud baked by heat, his eyes pale and unreadable. The scar that ran from ear to jawline looked clean, not cruel, like something that had healed the hard way, but healed all the same. Leora licked her dry lips. "You from this town?" she managed. "No," he said, brushing dust from his coat. "Just passing through. Got a ranch a mile east, if that counts." The way he said it, plain, unboastful, made her believe him. She glanced again at the cup. The steam had thinned, but the smell clung. Bone broth and onions, maybe a touch of thyme. It didn't smell like a trap. She took one cautious step, then another, until the tin touched her fingertips. It was warm. Her hands trembled as she lifted it, the heat burning her palms. The first sip nearly undid her. It wasn't the taste, more the kindness it carried. She looked up at him, her throat raw. "Why?" He didn't seem to understand the question. "Why what? Why help me? Why?" Time shrugged lightly. "Because somebody should have." The answer hung there, soft as smoke. For a heartbeat, she wanted to cry. Not the choking kind of tears, but the quiet ones that wash you clean. Instead, she swallowed them back. A horse snorted behind him. The animal stepped forward, a young blue-gray with uneven patches on its neck. It nosed at the air, curious but gentle. The man reached out, stroking its muzzle. "This here's Blue Jay," he said. "A little wild yet, but got a good heart." The horse blinked, then lowered its head toward her. Leora hesitated before letting it brush its nose against her fingers. The touch was soft, almost questioning. She couldn't remember the last time something came close without hurting. "Come on," the man said quietly. "You'll get sick if you stay out here." "I can't," she whispered. "They'll find me." He nodded, as if he'd heard the same fear in himself once. "Then you best come where they won't." They walked in silence. The sun sagged toward the horizon, turning the plains copper red. With each step, her bare feet stirred fine dust that clung to her ankles like ash. Behind them, the town shrank into a blur of boards and silence. Ahead lay open land, a ribbon of trail winding through sagebrush and wind. When they reached the edge of the pasture, he spoke again. "Name's Malachi Cole. Folks just call me Kai." "Leora," she said after a pause. "Lyora Finch." He nodded once like it was a name worth saying out loud. The homestead appeared small against the swelling dark. A barn leaned into the wind, and a single lamp burned in the window of a cabin. The smell of cedar smoke drifted from the chimney. As they approached, Kai pushed open the barn door and tied Blue Jay to a post. He left it slightly ajar, the hinge creaking. "You can rest here tonight," he said. "Ain't much, but it's quiet." He handed her a folded blanket and set a small loaf of cornbread on the step beside her. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Kua's open. You lock it if you need to, or don't." Leora's fingers brushed the worn edge of the blanket. No one had ever offered her the choice of staying or leaving. That alone felt heavier than the night. She stood in the doorway, watching him light a lamp inside. The glow warmed the space between them. As she crossed the threshold, the floor creaked beneath her weight, a sound that felt almost like belonging. She turned once more toward the fields. The horizon was dark, but for a moment, lightning flickered far away, tracing the shape of distant riders. She closed the door, but only halfway. The wind outside had quieted by the time they reached the porch. The boards creaked under Leora's bare feet, and the air smelled of rain that might never fall. Kai pushed the door open and stepped aside. Inside, the small cabin glowed with a single oil lamp, its light steady as breath. A pot simmered on the stove, the slow rhythm of bubbles filling the silence. The walls were built of pine, worn smooth by time, and the scent of wood smoke lingered deep in every crack. On a peg by the door hung a weathered duster, the kind a man keeps not for vanity, but because it's all that's ever kept him dry. "Sit," Kai said simply, his voice low, but not commanding. She did, carefully, on the edge of a bench near the fire. The warmth made her dizzy, like her body wasn't sure what to do with comfort. He poured her a small bowl of stew and placed it on the table beside her. Steam rose, carrying the faint sweetness of carrots and thyme. Lyora hesitated. Too many times she'd learned that kindness came with a cost. But the hunger overrode pride, and she took the spoon. The taste hit her tongue like memory. Home once before things had gone wrong, before names and debts and men who thought they owned her breath. She ate slowly, feeling every muscle unclench, one by one. Kai busied himself with the fire, tossing another log onto the coals. He didn't watch her. That, somehow, made her safer than any locked door could. When she finished, he set a tin cup of water near her hand and laid out a folded quilt beside the hearth. "You can rest here," he said, "close enough to the fire to keep warm." She looked at the quilt, stitched from scraps of fabric, each square different, some faded, some new. Someone had taken their time with it. "You made this?" she asked softly. "My mother did," he said. "Long time ago." He didn't explain further, and she didn't ask. Time 600 malms. Some stories weren't meant to be touched too soon. He rose and moved toward the door. "If the dark bothers you, leave it open," he said. "No one here's gonna take more than you give." Then he blew out the lamp and stepped outside, the door swinging gently behind him. The cabin settled into quiet. Leora sat by the fire, watching shadows stretch and sway across the floorboards. The warmth crawled up her legs, thawing the ache in her bones. Outside, the faint rustle of blue jay shifting in the barn carried through the thin walls. She closed her eyes and listened to it like a lullaby. For the first time in years, she didn't brace for footsteps behind her, didn't keep one hand ready to run. The air around her was still, filled with nothing but the pop of wood and the soft hum of safety. Her gaze drifted across the room. A small table stood by the window, half covered with sketches and a book bound in cracked leather. The corner of a page curled upward, showing the faint lines of a pencil drawing. A woman's silhouette, standing beside a tree. The detail caught her. The tilt of the shoulders, the way the wind seemed to move through the lines. Leora hesitated. Curiosity and guilt tangled in her chest. She rose, slow, the quilt still wrapped around her shoulders. The floor was cool beneath her feet. She reached out and lifted the corner of the page, tracing the outline of the woman's face with her eyes. There was no signature, no date, only tenderness in every stroke. A sudden creak at the doorway made her turn. The shadows shifted. Kai stood there, framed in the thin line of moonlight spilling through the door. He must have come back for something, though she hadn't heard the steps. His eyes fell on the open page, then on her. He didn't speak right away. The silence was neither anger nor surprise. It was the kind of pause that carried both memory and restraint. Leora's hands tightened around the edge of the quilt. "I didn't mean to pry," she whispered. He shook his head once. "It's fine." His voice was even, almost gentle. "Some things don't mind being seen." He stepped forward, closing the book softly and setting it aside. For a moment, their hands almost brushed. The firelight flickered between them, painting their shadows against the wall. Two figures still learning the shape of quiet. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. The lamp on the shelf rattled faintly as wind pressed against the walls. Kai looked toward the door, then back at her. "Storm's coming," he said. And for a heartbeat, she wasn't sure whether he meant the one in the sky or the one that had followed her here. Morning broke pale and heavy, the kind of light that makes everything honest. The storm had moved east, leaving behind a thin chill and a silence that felt cleaned out. Liora woke to the smell of coffee and cedar smoke. Her body ached less. The bruises had started to turn yellow, like the sky before dawn. Kai was outside, splitting wood. Each swing of the axe fell slow and steady, more like a rhythm than work. She watched from the doorway, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. The air smelled of wet earth and charred pine. For a moment, she let herself forget how she got here. Just stood there, watching the quiet strength in the way he moved. When he paused to wipe sweat from his brow, the sleeve of his shirt slipped. The scar caught the light, a thin, pale line wrapping around his wrist, clean and deliberate, the kind left by rope. It disappeared under the cuff, but Liora saw enough to know it wasn't an accident. He looked up and caught her staring. Their eyes met for a second too long before she stepped back inside. The old instinct to hide pressed hard in her chest. Yet what she felt wasn't fear. It was the weight of seeing something she wasn't supposed to understand. Inside, she busied herself near the table. The sketchbook still lay where he'd left it the night before. Curiosity itched again, but this time it came with care. She opened it gently, turning a few pages. Horses, hills, a broken fence. Then, near the center, the drawing she'd glimpsed before. A woman standing beside a pine, wind tugging at her skirt. The lines were tender, almost reverent. The woman's face was half turned away, but something in the shape of her shoulders spoke of waiting. Liora touched the page lightly. Whoever she was, the artist had loved her, or lost her, maybe both. She remembered her own mother then, the smell of bread baking, the rasp of a lullaby hummed too softly to remember the words. A single night flashed back. The sound of men's boots on the porch, her mother's hand pushing her toward the back door, whispering, "Run." Liora swallowed hard. Some memories don't fade. They just learn to stand quiet. The floor creaked. Kai's footsteps crossed the threshold. He carried a split log under each arm, shoulders slick with sweat, shirt clinging to his back. He set the wood by the stove, his movements calm, deliberate. When he saw the open sketchbook, he stopped. She froze, waiting for anger, but none came. He just leaned a hand against the table and looked down at the drawing. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, softly, "She was my mother." The room seemed to exhale. "She drew?" Liora asked. He shook his head. "No. I drew her. The last day I saw her." His voice caught a rough edge, not from weakness, but from the effort of control. "She was sold off a freight yard in Mississippi. My father never saw her again. said he could still hear her singing through the rails when the train pulled out. Leora didn't move. The ache in his words felt like something she'd carried too. "You were just a boy," she murmured. "Old enough to remember the sound," he said. Then quieter. "Old enough to know silence can kill a man slower than a bullet." He closed the book gently, fingers brushing the edge of the page as if it were skin. "Didn't mean for you to see it," he added, though not unkindly. "I'm glad I did," she said. "It's honest." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Honest can hurt." "Maybe that's why it matters," she replied, almost to herself. The wind shifted, pushing cool air through the cracks in the walls. Kai picked up the logs again, stacking them by the hearth. "I've got fences to mend," he said, glancing at her. "You should rest. I'll be near if you need." Leora nodded. Her eyes followed him as he stepped onto the porch, the door swinging halfway open behind him. The light framed his outline for a moment, before the screen slammed shut. She stood still, one hand resting on the table. The sketchbook lay closed, but its image burned behind her eyes. The woman beside the pine, hair caught in the wind, waiting for something that might never return. Through the window, she could see Kai's shadow moving between the fence posts, the steady rhythm of work against the open sky. Somewhere deep inside, something in her began to loosen, the part that believed pain was the only way to stay alive. A single drop of rain landed on the sill, darkening the wood. Then another. The storm that had passed seemed to circle back, quiet, but certain. Leora turned toward the door just as a faint knock echoed, not sharp, but hesitant, like a question. The knock came again, soft but insistent, the kind that carried more watching than asking. Kai's hand stilled over the kindling. He set the hatchet down and glanced at Leora. "Stay here," he said, quiet as a prayer. He opened the door just enough for the light to spill onto the porch. Outside stood a woman, older, wrapped in a shawl the color of old wheat, her gray hair pinned neat beneath her hat. Ruth Avery, the widow who kept a small farm up the ridge. She held a loaf of cornbread and a jug of milk, both cradled in her arms like peace offerings. "Mornin', Malachi," she said, her voice carrying the kind of weariness that only comes from knowing too much. "Heard there was company here. Figured you might need a bit extra." Kai took the bread with a nod. "Appreciate it, Ruth." Her eyes drifted past him, catching sight of Leora through the half-open door. Something flickered in them. Pity, curiosity, maybe warning. But Ruth wasn't the kind to speak where silence did better. She leaned closer to Kai. "Crow's boy's been riding near the ridge since sunrise," she said under her breath. "Looking for someone. Word is, they're meaning to collect a debt that ain't theirs." Kai's jaw tightened. "You tell him anything?" Ruth's chin lifted, proud. "Didn't seem like my business." She reached into her pocket and pressed a small brass key into his hand. "If trouble finds you, light the lamp in your north window. I'll see it." He nodded once, gratitude written in the set of his shoulders. "Thank you." She turned to go, boots whispering through the dust, her figure fading into the glare of morning. Kai shut the door gently. Leora watched him from the bench, her hands knotted in her lap. "She knows," she said. "She knows how to keep quiet," he replied. He set the bread on the table and poured 2 tin cups of milk. "Eat," he said. "You'll feel steadier." The cornbread was still warm. When she tore a piece, the scent rose, sweet and heavy, like comfort. They ate without talking. The quiet between them wasn't sharp anymore. It stretched like shade. After a while, she asked, "Those men, Crow's boys, they were the ones in Dry Creek?" Kai didn't answer at once. He stared at the fire, watching the smoke twist. "Likely. They've got the look of men who never learned to lose." She set her cup down, her throat dry again. "They'll come here." "Maybe," he said, "but they'll have to find the courage first." Something about his calm unsettled her. "You'd fight them?" He shook his head. "Fighting's easy. Living after ain't." The words landed heavier than the wind outside. She looked at him then, not the way a frightened woman looks at a protector, but the way a lost one looks at a mirror. There was strength in him, yes, but also the same tired kind she carried. The kind that came from staying kind when the world said not to. Kai noticed her watching. "You keep that door open if you need," he said softly. "Nobody here's going to close it on you." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She wanted to thank him, or maybe to say she didn't deserve this safety. Instead, she only nodded. Later, when he went out to feed the horses, Leora washed the dishes, her movements slow but sure. Through the open window, she could see him brushing down Blue Jay, his hand moving along the horse's neck in easy rhythm. The sight soothed her more than words could have. Then, from the far side of the ridge, a faint glint caught her eye. Sunlight flashing off metal, like a rifle barrel turning. Her stomach dropped. She opened the door, breath catching. "Time 700. Kai looked up instantly, reading her face before she spoke. "Someone's there," she whispered. He stepped to the edge of the porch, scanning the horizon. The wind shifted, carrying no sound but the low creak of distant fence wire. "Could be nothing," he murmured, but his hand rested near the rifle leaning by the post. Or it could be them. The air thickened with the smell of dust and tension. Leora felt her pulse in her fingertips. She wanted to say something, but every word seemed too loud. He turned toward her, his eyes steady, unreadable. "If they come," he said, "I'll talk first. Words are cheaper than blood." The calm in his voice scared her more than any shout. She watched as he walked down the steps, boots sinking slightly into the dirt. For a long moment, he stood there, the wind tugging at his coat, eyes fixed on the ridge. The land went still. Even the birds hushed. Then a shadow moved near the tree line, a figure too still to be wind. Kai didn't move. Only his hand tightened on the strap of his rifle. Inside, Leora pressed her back against the wall, the taste of cornbread still sweet on her tongue. and the echo of Ruth's words ringing in her head. Light the lamp in your north window. Dusk slipped in quiet as smoke. The wind had died. Only the boards of the porch creaked now and then, as if remembering footsteps. Kai sat on the top step, cleaning his rifle but not loading it. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a man who'd already chosen peace, but kept the weapon for what peace couldn't hold. Leora stood by the window, her hands trembling around the edge of the curtain. From where she watched, the ridge was fading into the same bruised blue as the coming night. "They're out there," she said. It wasn't a question. Kai didn't look up. "I know." "Then why don't you—" She stopped, unable to find the word. Run, maybe. Or fight. Either one would break the stillness. He set the rifle aside, barrel pointing down. Because a man who runs keeps running, and one who fights keeps killing. Either way, you don't stop hearing the noise. Leora turned toward him, her voice small. "They'll kill you." He met her gaze then. His eyes, gray-green and steady, caught the lamplight. "Maybe, but they won't unmake me." Silence stretched between them until the sound of hooves shattered it. Soft at first, then heavy, deliberate. 2, maybe 3 horses. Leora froze. Kai stood. The air outside tightened, every breath tasting of dust and warning. He stepped off the porch and down onto the dirt, stopping at the fence line. Leora followed as far as the doorway, clutching the frame like it might anchor her. The riders came into view, their outlines jagged against the setting sun. The one in front, broad, slouched, his hat too low to see his eyes, called out with a grin she could hear. "Evenin', Cole. Heard you been keepin' company that ain't yours to keep." Kai didn't answer. He just waited, hands loose at his sides. The man dismounted, spurs biting the dust, times 700 melms. He was tall, lean in the mean way of someone who's never gone hungry. The other 2 stayed mounted, faces half hidden. Leora's breath caught. She recognized that stance, the slant of his shoulders. Elias Crow. "You're on my land," Kai said. Crow spat into the dirt. "Ain't much of it worth standing on. You've got something of mine." Kai's tone stayed calm. "I doubt that." "The girl," Crow said. "The one hidin' behind your door. She owes me." The word owes cut through the air like a whip. Leora's fingers dug into the doorframe. Kai's shoulders tensed, just enough to see. "You want to tell me what kind of debt that is?" he asked. Crow grinned. "The kind a woman pays however a man says she should." For a heartbeat, everything went still. Then Kai stepped forward, slow and steady, until the distance between them felt smaller than breath. His voice came low, the edge of it cold as water drawn from a deep well. "You so sure you want to speak that way on my ground?" Crow's grin faltered, but only for a second. "You think you scare me, rancher?" "No," Kai said, calm as the dusk. But you ought to fear what comes when a man's done being silent. The other riders shifted, uneasy. Crow's hand brushed the butt of his pistol. Kai didn't move. His stillness carried its own kind of weight. The horses snorted, restless. The sky had gone the color of bruised copper, and the first stars blinked awake above the line of pines. Kai spoke again, softer now, but every word clear. You look at her again, Elias, and I'll dig a hole deep enough to forget you in. No cross, no stone, just dirt. Leora didn't breathe. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. Crow stared at him a long moment, jaw twitching, then laughed without mirth. You ain't worth the trouble, he muttered. Let's go. He swung into the saddle, spitting once more before turning his horse toward the ridge. The others followed, hooves pounding until the sound bled into the wind. Kai didn't watch them go. He stayed where he was, shoulders rising and falling once. Then he turned back toward the porch. Leora met his eyes in the doorway. The firelight behind her trembled across her face. Would you have killed him? She asked. Kai's jaw flexed. I don't want to, he said. But if it keeps the world from swallowing you, I would have dug that hole myself. She swallowed, her throat thick. And what would that make you? His gaze softened. A man who's tired of watching good people be broken. The words sank deep. She wanted to thank him, but the sound caught somewhere between her ribs and heart. Instead, she just nodded, her hands finally falling from the frame. He stepped onto the porch again, the boards creaking under his weight. You can lock the door tonight, he said quietly. Or not. Choice is still yours. Then he turned and walked toward the barn where Blue Jay waited, restless in the dark. Leora watched him go, her chest heavy with something that wasn't fear. Behind her, the lamp flickered, throwing a thin shadow on the wall, the shape of a woman standing half in light, half in darkness. And from somewhere down the valley, thunder rolled again, slower this time, like the world drawing breath before the next trial. Morning came pale and slow, brushing gold over the wet grass. The night's fear hadn't vanished. It had only changed shape, quieter now, like a bruise under the skin. Leora stepped out to the porch, wrapped in the quilt Kai's mother had sewn. The air smelled of smoke and sage, the kind of clean that follows danger. Kai was already outside, sleeves rolled to his elbows, working at the fence. Each swing of his hammer sounded steady, deliberate. The rhythm calmed her, though every strike carried a reminder of last night's promise, a hole deep enough to forget him in. She sat on the steps, watching. The land around them seemed larger in daylight, fields of dry grass bending under the wind, mountains stretched far and blue. Blue Jay grazed near the barn, tail flicking, occasionally lifting his head as if checking on her. When Kai noticed her watching, he tipped his hat. Didn't mean to wake you. You didn't, she said softly. I just wanted to see if the world's still here. It is, he replied, Most days, that's enough. They shared a silence that wasn't awkward anymore, the kind that let both breathe without explaining. After a while, Leora stood and walked toward the horse. Blue Jay nickered, brushing his nose against her palm. She smiled faintly and began to run her fingers through his mane. Kai watched from the fence line. "He likes you," he said. "He's gentle," she murmured. "Gentler than most men I've known." He didn't argue, just kept working, driving another nail into the post. Later, when the sun sat high and the air shimmered with heat, Leora helped him carry kindling to the porch. Her steps were slower, careful with her still healing ribs, but she insisted. Each trip between the woodpile and the house steadied her, gave her something to belong to. "You don't have to," Kai said. "I know," Shicha replied, a quiet pride in her tone. "That's why I want to." They ate lunch on the porch: beans, cornbread, black coffee. The meal was simple but tasted of safety. Afterward, Kai handed her a small brush and nodded toward Blue Jay. "If you're up for it, he could use some care." The brush fit her hand as if it had been waiting for it. Each stroke brought back a rhythm she'd forgotten, slow, patient, the kind that teaches your heart how to move again. Blue Jay leaned into her touch, his breath warm against her sleeve. For the first time in years, Leora felt something like peace, fragile and trembling, but real. As the sun tilted west, she went inside to tidy the cabin. She folded the quilts, rinsed the tin cups, swept the hearth. Her movements carried an old, domestic grace, the body remembering what it was to care for a place, not just survive in it. By evening, the shadows lengthened. She stood near the door, watching the light turn amber. The air shifted. A faint whiff of whiskey drifted from the valley. It was nothing, maybe a wagon passing the ridge, but her chest seized tight, breath catching. The smell dragged her backward in time. Laughter, hands too rough, her own voice swallowed in dirt. Her fingers shook. She stumbled against the wall. The world went narrow, sounds fading to a hum. Kai saw her from outside. He came to the door fast, but didn't touch her. "Leora," he said, voice low. "It's all right. You're here. You're safe." She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. He knelt, lowering himself until his eyes were level with hers. "Look at me," he whispered. "No one's touching you. No one will." Her breath came in sharp bursts, shallow and panicked. Kai kept his voice steady. "You can breathe. I'll count with you. 1 for the air in, 1 for the air out." He lifted one hand, palm up, leaving space between them. It was an offering, not a reach. Slowly, she matched her breathing to his count. In, out, again. The trembling eased. "An old hand taught me that," he said softly. "Said safety's when somebody sees you and doesn't take a damn thing away." Leora stared at him, tears burning her eyes. "You really believe that?" "I have to," he said. "Otherwise the world's just noise and fences." The quiet that followed was warm, heavy with unspoken things. Leora leaned her head against the wall, exhausted but lighter. The faint scent of whiskey faded, replaced by cedar and stew from the pot. Kai stood, brushing dust from his knees. "If you're steady," he said, "supper's nearly ready." She nodded. "I think I am." He smiled, faint but real, before heading back to the stove. Leora exhaled. The night wind pushed through the open door, cool and kind. She reached up and set a small pouch of dried herbs on the windowsill. Rosemary, sage, and lavender. Her mother once said such things could keep bad dreams from coming in. When she looked out toward the hills, dusk had gathered. Somewhere far off, a horse cried, the sound thin and strange like a warning. She couldn't tell if it came from her memory or the dark itself. The next morning was the kind that carried quiet on its back. The clouds hung low and pale, like they were listening. Leora sat at the table, mending the sleeve of Kai's work shirt. Her stitches were uneven, but she didn't mind. The motion calmed her, needle in, thread through, like breathing made visible. Kai was outside splitting kindling again, the sound steady as a clock. When he came in, he smelled of sawdust and dawn. "You don't have to do that," he said, nodding at the shirt. "I know," she replied. "It just feels good to fix something." He smiled at that. A small, fleeting thing, but it warmed the room. They ate in silence for a while, the sound of spoons against tin, the only proof of living. Then Leora said, almost too quietly, "You asked me once where I was heading." Kai nodded. "I remember." She kept her eyes on the table. "I didn't have an answer then. Thought if I just kept walking, maybe I'd stop being what they said I was." Her voice broke around the edges. "But running don't wash you clean. It just spreads the dirt thinner." He set his cup down, waiting. She took a long breath. "Those men in Dry Creek, they worked for Elias Crow. I used to wash linen at his saloon, just for bread and a roof. One night they locked the door, said I owed him more than washing could pay. I fought, but..." Her throat closed. "I ran when I could. Been running since." Kai didn't move. Didn't reach for her, only his eyes changed. Softer, darker somehow. "Then you don't owe them a damn thing," he said. Her laugh came brittle. "They don't see it that way." "Then they're wrong," he said, quiet but certain. "And men like that hate being told so." She looked up, and for the first time, there was no flinch left in her gaze, just exhaustion, and something beginning to mend. "You ever lose something you couldn't name?" she asked. He hesitated. "Every day, once." He poured coffee into 2 mugs, sat across from her. "My mother was taken south before I was grown. Father tried to follow, but died fixing a roof the same summer. Left me the land and the sound of rain through an empty house." He traced a thumb along the rim of his cup. "Used to think silence was mercy. Now I know it's just the long shape of grief." They sat in the soft quiet that followed. Both turned toward the window, watching the line of hills fade into mist. After a while, Kai spoke again. My father told me something before he passed. Said, don't let silence turn mean. If you can't fix the world, at least don't join the breaking. Lyora's lips parted around a shaky breath. That's what you live by? I try. He smiled faintly. Doesn't always work, but trying's better than nothing. Outside, Blue Jay snorted, uneasy. The air had changed, carrying the low hum of approaching hooves. Leora's spine stiffened. Kai caught it instantly. They won't come here in daylight, he said, but his hand brushed the window frame, as if memorizing where the rifle leaned. Still, she could see the question forming behind his calm. What if they already have? She stood and went to the window. From the far ridge, 3 dark shapes moved along the trail, slow, deliberate. She couldn't make out faces, but she didn't need to. It's them, she whispered. Kai rose. You sure? I'd know the way they ride anywhere. Her voice trembled but didn't break. He looked at her, then to the north-facing window where Ruth's lantern sat cold and dark. His jaw flexed. If they come close, I'll light it. Leora nodded. She said she'd see it. Yeah, he said softly. And maybe this time the town won't stay silent. The shapes on the ridge paused, as if the riders were deciding. One turned his horse. Sunlight flashed off the barrel of a gun. Leora stepped back from the glass. They're watching. Kai's tone stayed calm. Then let 'em watch. Maybe they'll see something worth fearing. The wind picked up, rattling the loose latch on the door. The smell of iron and sage drifted through. Kai moved closer, lowering his voice. If it comes to it, I want you to stay inside. Don't give them what they came for. Your fear. She wanted to argue, but the steadiness in his eyes rooted her in place. The sound of hooves echoed once, then faded into the valley. For now they were gone, but the dust they left behind hung in the air, glowing faintly in the afternoon light. Leora exhaled, shoulders sagging. They'll be back, she said. Kai nodded. Then we'll be ready. He turned away, picking up the lamp and the small tin of oil beside it. His reflection glimmered faintly in the glass. Leora watched him, realizing how fragile and fierce he looked at once. A man still carrying silence, but this time using it as shield, not shackle. And outside, near the edge of the trail, the new prints of horseshoes overlapped the old. By sundown, the clouds had thickened into a bruised wall of gray. The air was still, too still, the kind that makes animals restless and men thoughtful. Kai stood by the porch rail, filling the lamp with oil. The glass caught the last light of day and turned it gold. Leora lingered by the door, watching him. Will she really see it from her ridge? Ruth? He nodded. She will. Folks like her don't need much light to know where it's needed. He struck a match. The wick flared, small but steady. There, he said. That's our North Star tonight. Inside, the cabin felt different, heavier, as if waiting. The stew on the stove had gone cold. Leora's hands wouldn't stay still. She folded and refolded the same piece of cloth until the thread frayed. Every sound, the groan of wood, the flicker of flame, made her heart skip. Then came the hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, not hurrying, because they didn't need to. Kai turned his head toward the sound, his expression unreadable. "Stay inside," he said. "If anything happens, light the lamp again." She wanted to protest, but something in his calm made her obey. She stepped back from the window as the shapes emerged from the dusk. 3 riders again, but this time closer, clearer. Elias Crow rode in front. The grin on his face wasn't amusement anymore. It was hunger. His 2 men hung back, eyes scanning the yard like wolves sizing up a pen. Kai stepped down from the porch, his hands empty. "You were told once to stay gone," he said. Crow laughed, low and sharp. "You talk like a preacher, but I hear you've been keeping a thief under your roof." Kai didn't blink. "She's not yours to name." "She owes," Crow said. "You can dress it up in all the fine words you cuffs want, but debt's debt. I'm here to collect." Leora, watching from behind the curtain, felt her stomach twist. Crow's voice scraped like gravel over her skin. She remembered it too well. The sound of his boots, the stink of whiskey. The word mine spat like a brand. Kai's tone stayed level. "You keep records now, Elias? You ever think maybe the only debt worth paying is to your own conscience?" Crow smirked. "Don't got one of those. Never needed it to stay alive." The men behind him shifted, uneasy. One spit into the dirt. The other glanced toward the ridge where a faint light flickered. The north lamp, bright as an eye. They noticed it too late. Ruth had seen. Kai took another step forward. "You think this is your land, your law, but there's more eyes on you than you think." Crow's face twitched. "You calling for help?" Kai shrugged. "I don't need to." The wind moved then, brushing through the pines with a whisper-like breath. Up the ridge, more lights began to appear, small lanterns, one by one. Leora covered her mouth. They came. Crow looked toward the glow, the sneer slipping from his face. "You think they'll fight for her?" Kai's answer came steady. "They don't have to. They just need to see you for what you are." Crow spat, voice sharp. "You talk too soft for a man who wants to live." He turned his gaze toward the cabin. "She'll come out, or I'll go in." Leora's hands shook. She wanted to hide, to vanish into the floorboards, but she was done being a ghost. Her fear trembled into something else. Anger. Brittle and trembling, but real. She pushed the door open and stepped onto the porch. Crow's grin spread. "There she is. Thought maybe you'd learned obedience by now." Her voice was quiet but steady. "No, Elias. I just learned to stop kneeling." The words hit him like a slap. One of the men cursed under his breath. Kai moved slightly forward, standing between her and them, his body calm but solid as a wall. Crow laughed, forced. "You think that means something? She's nothing but—" Kai cut him off. "Careful." His voice was low, dangerous not for its volume, but for how sure it was. Crow's hand twitched toward his gun. The sound of leather creaking filled the air. Then, from the ridge, a rifle cracked. Not close, not aimed to kill, just a warning shot. The bullet struck dirt between Kai and Crow, kicking up dust. Ruth's aim was still true. Crow startled, eyes snapping toward the ridge where the light burned brighter now. More silhouettes moved behind it. Neighbors, quiet folk, the kind who'd always kept their heads down. Tonight, they were standing tall. "You tell that woman to put her gun down," Crow barked. Kai didn't. "I'd say she's speaking for the rest of us." For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Then Crow's horse snorted, breaking the tension. He cursed low, swung into the saddle. "This ain't over," he said. Kai's reply was calm. "It is if you ride away." Crow hesitated, his pride warring with the fear creeping in behind his eyes. Then he spat again, turned his horse and rode off into the darkness. The others followed. The dust hung in their wake, catching the faint orange of the lamps. Kai exhaled, long and slow. "You did good," he said without turning. Leora swallowed. "I was scared." He nodded. "That's how you know you're alive." The wind changed direction, carrying the faint scent of rain. Up the ridge, Ruth's lantern stayed burning, a quiet promise that this time the town had not looked away. "Time 1-3s. Leora looked at it until her eyes stung. "What if they come back?" Kai's voice was soft but sure. "Then we'll stand again. We don't hide from daylight anymore." The words sank deep, steady as roots. But in the silence that followed, Leora felt her knees weaken. Her body remembered what her heart had tried to forget. She swayed, gripping the porch rail. Kai turned fast, catching her before she fell. Her breath hitched, tears breaking loose without sound. "Easy," he murmured. "It's over." But somewhere far off, thunder rolled low, reminding them that even peace comes with echoes. Rain began before dawn, soft at first, like a hand testing the world's forgiveness. The sound of it on the tin roof folded through the cabin, a rhythm that could almost pass for peace. But peace, Leora learned, wasn't silent. It trembled, fragile as the breath between storms. She woke on the floor near the hearth, wrapped in Kai's old coat. Her body still remembered fear, even as her mind tried to forget. When she sat up, her muscles ached, but not from running, only from surviving. Kai was at the table, carving wood by lamplight. He looked up as she stirred. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said. "You didn't." Her voice came low, still hoarse from last night's shouts. "I dreamed of the ridge, of the lights." He nodded. "They did good." She looked at him, You did good. He smiled faintly, though there was weariness beneath it. We both stood. Outside, the rain thickened. A knock came, a quick, sharp sound that made Leora's pulse leap. Kai rose, moving to the door with quiet caution. But when he opened it, no one stood there. Only a muddy envelope pinned beneath a horseshoe nail. He tore it free and opened it under the lamplight. The paper was cheap, ink bleeding from damp. Just one line scrawled rough. Blood don't forgive debt. No signature, but they both knew who wrote it. Leora's hands trembled. He'll come back. Kai set the paper down, folding it once and then again, until it vanished in his palm. Let him. The calm in his tone frightened her more than anger ever could. She crossed the room. You can't keep fighting ghosts for me, Kai. I'm not, he said, meeting her eyes. I'm just refusing to let them write your ending. The words cracked something in her, something she hadn't known was still fragile. Her breath caught, tears spilling fast. She pressed her hands to her face, shaking. I'm so tired of owing, of being something someone claims. Kai took a slow step forward, then knelt. Not like a man bowing, but like one choosing to meet her where she was. Then stop owing, he said softly. You don't owe me. You don't owe them. You only owe yourself a chance to live without shame. She looked up through the blur of tears. And if I can't? Then I'll wait, he said, until you can. The world narrowed to the space between them. The steady beat of rain, the smell of cedar and smoke. She stared at his hands, calloused and still, resting on his knees. Not reaching, not demanding, just waiting. Something inside her shifted. Slowly, she reached out, her fingertips brushing the back of his hand. You're the only man who's never tried to take something from me, she whispered. Kai's gaze softened. Maybe I don't see you as something to take. The simplicity of it unraveled her. She closed her eyes and let herself cry. Not the small, hidden tears she'd always fought, but the full kind, deep and shaking. Kai didn't hush her, didn't touch her. He just stayed there, steady as the earth under rain, until her sobs faded to tremors. When she could breathe again, he rose and offered her a cup of water. She took it, drinking slow. The taste was clean, real. Hours passed. The rain eased into mist. They sat by the fire, quiet, both too emptied to speak. Kai whittled a piece of wood in his lap, the shavings curling to the floor like petals. Leora watched his hands, noticing how deliberate they were, every motion careful, as if he carved meaning out of patience. After a while, she asked, "What are you making?" He smiled without looking up. "Something I've been thinking about for a while." He turned the carving slightly. A faint metallic glint showed beneath the wood, a ring of braided silver and horsehair, small enough to fit between his fingers. Leora stared. "What is that?" Kai glanced at her. eyes unreadable in the firelight. "Maybe a promise," he said quietly, "but only if you want it to be." The words hung in the air, light as smoke, but heavy in meaning. She didn't answer, couldn't. Her throat was too full, her chest too tight. She only looked at him, at the man who had waited without taking, who had spoken softly when the world shouted cruel. He set the carving aside. "You don't have to decide now," he said. "Just know it's here." Outside, the rain had stopped. The land smelled of wet soil and new beginnings. A faint breeze lifted the edge of the curtain, letting the first light of dawn spill across the floor. Leora turned toward it, her heartbeat slow, certain. For the first time since she could remember, she felt the weight inside her ease. The ghosts had not left, but they'd lost their grip. Behind her, Kai's voice came low, rough with fatigue. "Rest now. You've done your part." She nodded and closed her eyes. The last thing she heard before sleep was the soft scrape of his chair and the quiet hum of an old tune, half hymn, half memory. The morning broke clean, washed new by the rain. The creek that had been silent all winter began to murmur again under the hill, and smoke from the chimney drifted straight into the sky, like a promise finally kept. Leora woke to the sound of wood being chopped, steady, measured, unhurried. She lay for a while listening, letting the rhythm fold into her breath. The air smelled of coffee and wild mint. Kai must have found some near the ridge. When she stepped outside, the sun was just climbing, soft gold spilling over the wet fields. Kai was by the fence line, shirt sleeves rolled, the muscles in his forearms moving easy under the skin. He turned when he heard her. "Mornin'," he said. "Mornin'," she echoed, voice still husky with sleep. There was no fear between them anymore, only quiet. The kind of quiet that had weight, that meant both had survived the storm and chosen to stay. Kai leaned his axe against the fence, reached into his pocket, and drew out something small, glinting. "Been working on this a while," he said. He held it out in his open palm, a simple ring, braided from horsehair and silver wire. It wasn't polished or perfect. It bore the marks of his hands, the proof of effort. The sunlight caught in its twists like water in a stream. Leora froze, the breath leaving her all at once. "Kai." He didn't rush her. "I don't have much," he said, voice low, steady. "Just a piece of land, a horse that won't always listen, and a name that's been scrubbed clean by work. But if you'd let me, I'd like to give you that name, not as a chain, just a place to rest." The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of pine and wet soil. Leora's throat tightened. Her life had been built on being taken, not offered. Words had been cages. Hands had been claims. But here stood a man trembling not from pride or hunger, but from hope. "I don't deserve," she began. Kai cut her off gently. "You deserve peace, Leora. That's all I'm asking to share." Tears blurred her vision. She reached out, but her hands shook too much to take the ring. He didn't move closer. He simply waited, the way he always did. When she finally managed to speak, it came out a whisper. "I don't know how to say yes." "Then don't," he said softly. "Just breathe it." She did. One long, shuddering breath that seemed to empty years of fear from her lungs. Then she nodded, quick, almost desperate. "Yes." Kai let out a slow breath, shoulders loosening. He smiled, not wide, not proud, just full and quiet. He stepped forward, slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as if the world had shaped it for her. The moment didn't need more words. The air itself seemed to hold them steady. After a while, he spoke again. "We'll tell Ruth to come by tomorrow," he said. "She knows how to say vows better than I ever could." Leora laughed through her tears. "And she'll bring bread." "Sweet bread," he said, pretending solemnity. "Every wedding needs something sweet." They stood there together, hands still joined, the world spread wide around them, clean, awake, unafraid. By afternoon, they began to prepare. Leora washed her hair in the creek, combing it through with a bit of rosemary. She found a piece of blue cotton folded neat by her basin, a gift left quietly on the table, smelling of cedar soap. She pressed it to her cheek and smiled. When she stepped outside wearing it, Kai was tightening the saddle strap on Blue Jay. He turned, looked at her for a long moment, then simply nodded. The nod said everything. They spent the evening setting out 2 cups, 1 loaf of bread, and a jar of wildflowers, yellow lupine and blue flax from the meadow. Kai carved a new handle for the door. Leora swept the porch until it shone under the lantern light. It wasn't preparation for guests. It was a way of honoring what tomorrow meant. As the last light faded, they sat side by side on the steps. The silence between them was full of rain-washed air, of heartbeats steady at last. Leora leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes half closed. "Funny," she murmured. "I used to think love had to hurt." Kai's hand rested gently over hers. Maybe it just had to wait. The stars came out slow, one by one, until the sky glittered with them. The lamp in the window burned low, its flame small but sure, like the start of something that knew how to last. The morning began with the sound of rain whispering against the tin roof, soft but steady, as though the world was being washed clean one memory at a time. April had come shy and slow this year, but when it arrived, it carried mercy in its hands. The valley glistened under the gray sky, the creek swelling with life again, and every pine branch hung heavy with water. Inside the cabin, Leora stood before the small mirror hung by a nail, smoothing the folds of the blue cotton dress Kai had left for her days ago. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and soap, like everything he touched. Her fingers trembled as she braided her hair, not out of fear this time, but out of wonder. It felt strange to prepare for a day that asked for no apology. Kai was outside, tending the fire pit, his boots sunk in the wet earth. When she opened the door, a mist rolled in around her ankles. He turned, his face calm beneath the brim of his hat. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. Leora smiled, small but steady. "I've been waiting my whole life to be." Ruth Avery arrived soon after, wrapped in her old shawl, her gray braid damp from the drizzle. She carried a basket of warm, sweet bread and a small bouquet of lupine wrapped in twine. "Didn't bring no preacher," she said with a wink. "Figure God don't need to be summoned to a thing like this." The three of them stood before the porch, the rain still falling, soft and even. Blue Jay watched from under the eaves, his ears twitching at every drop that hit the dirt. Ruth began, her voice firm but gentle. "Marriage ain't for fixing what's broke. It's for keeping what's whole when the world tries to take it." She looked between them. "You both know what hurt feels like. That's good. Means you'll treat kindness like something sacred." She nodded at Kai first. "Your turn, boy." Kai's voice was low, steady like the land he worked. "Leora," he began, "I don't promise easy days or full cupboards, but I promise a roof that don't fall in and a fire that won't go out for lack of trying. I promise to listen, even when silence feels safer." Then Ruth turned to Leora. "And you, child?" Leora's breath hitched. She looked at Kai, at the scar along his jaw, the lines near his eyes that spoke of years without complaint, and she found her words. "I can't promise I'll never be afraid," she said, "but I'll stay when it rains. And when he forgets to come inside, I'll open the door and wait." The wind shifted, carrying their vows through the pines. Ruth smiled, eyes glistening. "Then that's all that's needed. You're bound by what's real. Now go on. Live gentle." She pressed the loaf of bread into Leora's hands and kissed her cheek before heading down the path, her boots squelching in the mud. "Don't let that stew burn," she called over her shoulder. When she disappeared behind the rise, silence settled, except for the rain. Leora turned to Kai, the loaf warm between her palms. "That's it?" she whispered. "That's it," he said. "Sometimes love don't need witnesses." She smiled through the tears beginning to form. "I think I like it better this way." The rain began to fall harder, drumming the roof like a hymn. She laughed, a sudden bright sound that startled even herself, and stepped barefoot off the porch into the mud. Her dress clung to her legs, and her hair came loose in dark curls. Kai blinked at her. "You'll catch cold." "Then I'll have to stand closer to the fire," she said, spinning once, rain flying off her fingertips. He shook his head, half smiling. "You're wild." "I'm alive," she replied, and something in her tone made him move before he thought. He stepped off the porch, boots sinking deep. The rain soaked his shirt through in seconds, but when she held out her hand, he took it. They moved without rhythm, without thought, just slow circles in the mud. Her forehead rested against his, her breath mingling with his in small clouds. Their hands fit together like they'd always been meant to, fingers rough and sure. Leora whispered, "All my life I thought love was something you had to earn." Kai's thumb brushed the back of her hand. "Then let this be the first thing you don't have to." Thunder rolled low across the valley, soft and deep. The world around them blurred. The hills, the pines, the gray sky melting into one endless horizon. He pulled her closer, his lips finding hers under the rain. The kiss was unhurried, reverent, a slow undoing of years of silence. When they broke apart, Leora laughed again, her face wet but radiant. "We're soaked to the bone." Kai smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Then we're baptized." They stayed like that, standing in the downpour until their breaths slowed and the laughter faded into stillness. Around them, the earth began to steam where the rain met warmth. The world smelled of rebirth. As the storm eased into a fine mist, they walked back to the porch. Leora paused at the steps, turning back toward the meadow. The flowers, wild lupine, shy and stubborn, had raised their heads again. She pointed. "They survived the storm." Kai nodded. "So did we." Inside, the fire still burned. They sat before it wrapped in one quilt, steam rising from their clothes. Leora leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, and watched the flames dance low. "Do you think," she said softly, "we'll ever stop remembering?" Kai thought for a long moment. "No, but maybe that's the point. Scars don't disappear. They just stop owning you." She reached up, traced the thin line of his wrist where the old rope mark lived. "And if they start to hurt again?" He smiled. "Then I'll let you touch them until they don't." Outside, twilight deepened, turning the rain silver. Blue Jay shuffled in his stall, the steady sound of breathing filling the night. Ruth's lamp glowed faintly from the ridge, a small golden star above the valley. Leora noticed it first. "She left it burning." Kai followed her gaze. "So we remember we're not alone anymore." The wind sighed through the pines. The world, for once, didn't feel cruel. It just felt vast, waiting, possible. She turned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "I used to think happiness was something that happened to other people." He looked at her, eyes gentle. "Maybe it's just what happens when you stop running." She smiled, the kind of smile that lived deep in the bones. The fire popped softly, casting light over the quilt, the tin cup, the ring on her finger, all the small, ordinary things that had somehow become sacred. When she finally spoke again, her voice trembled with peace. "I think this is what home feels like." Kai pressed his lips to her temple. "Then let's keep it." And outside, as if answering, the rain began again, soft, forgiving, endless. The sound of it on the roof was not sorrow anymore, but the steady heartbeat of a world made whole. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with thunder or youth. It comes slow, like the April rain that finds its way back to the earth. Kai and Leora's story reminds us that no matter how long we've carried our hurt, it's never too late to be seen, to be held, and to start again. Out there in the wide West, two hearts found peace, not through promises, but through the simple grace of staying. And maybe that's what home really means. Not a place, but a person who lets you rest. If this story touched something quiet inside you, a memory, a moment, or a name you still say softly, we'd love to hear it. Tell us where you're watching from, or what part of Leora and Kai's journey spoke to you the most. If you enjoyed this time with us, please like the video, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you won't miss the next tale from our Western evenings. We share new stories every week, stories about hope, kindness, and the strength that still lives in the calm of older hearts. Thank you for riding with us tonight.